Yeah, I say let's go to a football season that is still 10 days from getting underway, at least for the Philadelphia Eagles. But as of right now, we know who the 53 guys are going to be playing next Sunday. No, we don't. And we'll talk about that for the next couple hours here on Birds 365. Back guys. John McMullen, Jody McDonald. Busy day for Johnny Mac yesterday. Did you get more than 2 questions in yesterday, Johnny Mac?
I believe I got 3 in.
Yeah, I was watching the press availability. I go, oh, that's McMullen. Oh, that's McMullen again.
Well,
Johnny Mac getting a third question. Were you the only one who showed up?
No, everybody was there. See, here was the problem. They didn't release the roster to us, so we didn't know who was on the stinking team. And Howie's already up there, ready to go. And so, Howie's kind of important in the organization.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know that, but, meanwhile, the the employees that are supposed to release this stuff, we didn't have it. So we're all sitting there. And I think Rube asked the first question about Isaiah Rodgers, because we're all sitting there going down the cut. Now, we knew the vast majority, but there were 5, 6 we didn't know. And we're all trying to scan the list and trying to figure it out. So you heard some redundant questions, and that's because people couldn't listen because they were studying the list, and they only released the cuts. They didn't release the actual roster of the guys on the team. Oh, it was a cluster, Jody. It was a cluster. I said, now this is competitive advantage.
Right. To not allow the media to be prepared and ready to go. But that speaks very highly of you that you were able to come up with questions like that without having all the information there.
Most of mine were philosophical questions. That's the reason I went that way, because, I was talking to Howie about all the changes and the waiver wire and the practice squad, the expanded practice squad over the past couple of years, the ability to put veterans on the more liberal IR rules, because you've seen this change. People already, people are like, the only thing I get mad, I get stuff wrong all the time. Like, I'll say Jody was completely right on Eli Ricks. They were concerned about losing him on waivers. I have no problem admitting that. I think people turn off. That's what bothers me. And they say, oh, McMullen got it wrong. And I'm like, what I said was, it doesn't matter, because they'll get all of them through waivers. Now, we'll never be able to prove that.
About Rick. We'll never know.
We'll never know. To keep him. And hey, somebody might pick up, they kept Goodrich as well. And somebody might pick up Gardner. I don't think they will. And ultimately, they'll have all 3, which is what I said. And I said, John McMullen, would take Bakai Gardner, because I think he played better over the summer. And he's a special teams player. And that's one of the questions I asked. I said it yesterday on the show. I'm like, poor Michael Clay. I mean, people crap on the guy. They didn't help him a little bit, Jody.
They don't have a punter. They don't have a punter returner.
Yeah.
And as of right now, they don't. That's why I said at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't the
No. Well, yeah, they have to have a punter. They have to have a punter week 1 in New England, obviously. So there's going to be change. I can't believe they're going to go into a season with only 4 wide receivers as well, to be honest. That's very light at a position you need bodies at. And a bunch of guys are going to be back on the practice squad. We're going to see it today. The Eagles are practicing a little bit later because they want to have their practice squad out there, or the vast majority of it, the guys they're bringing back. So they have to wait till waivers at 1:00. But they'll have a lot of bodies there, and I'm sure they'll have some special teams bodies, and they'll, Garner will be back if he doesn't get claimed. Van Sumeren will be back if he doesn't get claimed. I've already heard Kayvon Wallace is not coming back. We'll see if that shakes out.
Not coming back because there are other teams interested, not that the Eagles have written him off, right?
Yeah. No. I think the Eagles would love to have him back. I think he wants a change of scenery because, well, I know I talked to Kayvon a bunch this summer, and he had a good camp, and I think he sees, sometimes you get pigeonholed in an organization. I think they pigeonholed him and they put him in a box, and he probably thinks he needs a change of scenery. He's probably right. And hopefully wherever he goes, he'll get a second chance and maybe he can prove some things. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people pointed out to me they weren't very good on special teams, which I know we talked about that a lot, Jody, you and I. And that's true. And in theory, the goal is to get better. So if you're saying, well, these guys weren't that good to begin with, maybe the new guys will be better. Well, who are the new guys? I mean, they typically, when you talk about your core special teams players, right? You talk about backup linebackers. They got one, and he's their special teams player, Christian Ellis. Your backup safeties, and they cut Kayvon Wallace, so it's going to have to be whether Justin Evans, Terrell Edmonds, Sidney Brown, some amalgamation, whoever they choose. The other two are going to have to be big on special teams. Backup defensive back, so that's where Calais Ringo's got to step in right away and be a good special teams player. He's got the athleticism for it. Backup wide receivers also a big special team. They don't have any backup. They Wes ain't playing special teams. Alameda can return punts if they need him to, but that's it. I mean, yeah, I realize nobody cares about it, but I'm like, oof.
They left Michael Clay. They just left him out to dry. We'll see if there are any reparations over the next 24, 48 hours. But right now it looks like can you get 11 guys to play punt coverage, Michael Clay? Good luck. See if you get those guys. Along those lines, one question. I got like 40 questions for you. Last year, Reed Blankenship, when not starting, when CJ was your starter, Blankenship play specials, and we know he's the main guy at safety now. Got deference, didn't have to play preseason games, looked great in practice, everything else. They used to have a guy named Malcolm Jenkins, who was also their number one safety, who they put out there for every special teams play, played every play of the game except for offense. Will Blankenship be part of the special team?
He might have to be. And Rodney did that as well. Give Rodney some credit. Rodney McLeod did that as well. He might have to. N'Kobe might have to. That's where we are now. They might get to the 53 and they're going to bring in a punter, as I said. I think they'll try to bring in a receiver, maybe another linebacker. We'll see how they shake things. I can't imagine they're going to carry 4 tight ends, but so ultimately I think they're going to try to manipulate Calcaterra onto the practice squad, but we'll see how that shakes out. You might see where they elevate 2 guys each week early in the season to play special teams and just make some of those back end guys inactive on the 53. And they, whether it's Garner, Van Sumer, and somebody like, they elevate those guys to actually play, and the other guys are inactive. They might handle it that way
3 times, right?
Yeah, you can only do that 3 times. The
practice squad 3 times, and then after that, he has to be on the 53.
Yeah. And that's why I said early in the season they might do that. They did that at punt returner with Covey last year. He wasn't on the roster. They elevated him for the first 3 games, and then they added him to the roster. And typically over the first, you might get a banged up injury. Somebody goes to injury reserve. You might open up a roster spot. So they might handle it that way. And that's why we call it the initial 53.
Right.
It's not the final 53.
And it's not even the initial 53 might be a matter of hours. If there are claims, the Eagles decide there's someone out there that they want, they put in a claim and they get the claim. And that's as tricky a part as anything because they're number 31 on the list. It goes by the reverse of last year's standing. So you could put a claim for a guy, think you're going to get a guy going to solve a problem. Oops, somebody else claimed him before you, so you don't get him anyway. So today is still a very important day for roster movement. When Howie sat down before you guys yesterday, Had you been informed that they had traded for Albert O?
Yes, we did know that.
They did give you that piece of info ahead of time, huh?
Yeah, we did know that. So we did know, and I'm not going to try to butcher Albert's name just yet before I get a chance to learn it. So we're
Right.
going to call him Albert O for the time being. Yeah, we did know that, but we didn't know if Calcaterra made it. Like, I assumed Alberto was going to replace Calcaterra, and he wasn't going to be on the roster. So, you know, you have to sift through the cuts when they finally do it in press conference. And sure enough, Calcaterra is not on the list, which kind of surprised me after the trade. But yeah, I mean, they went very heavy on the defensive front, which I knew they were going to do. They kept 13 guys, Jody, 13. Now, I had them keeping 12. And I knew they wanted to keep Kentavious Street. I'm like, well, you can't keep 13. I mean, you just can't. Well, they did. I mean, they did. And those are their best players. So if you look at it that way, he's certainly one of their 53 best players.
Right. But here's the guy who doesn't necessarily look at that way. Michael Clay. Is Kentavious Street going to go down and cover punts or kicks? I don't think so. So you want to keep 13 D linemen. Somebody has to play special teams.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Nolan Smith, if he's healthy, you know, he's going to be a big part of it as well. And he's athletic enough to do it. You know, they also cut Kyron Johnson, who's a big specialty. I mean, they gutted this, and I get it. They weren't good on special teams, but they weren't good with their best players. Now they don't have their best players and no obvious replacements. So there's going to be a lot of movement. It's just a snapshot right now. It doesn't look good for Michael Clay. They're going to do some things, and it might just be as simple as elevating, as I said, certain guys and not playing other guys early in the season. Then ultimately, if somebody plays well, like say they bring Kyron back, and somebody plays well those first 3 weeks on special teams, then they're going to get a roster spot. And they're going to, you know, they'll go about it that way. So I'm by no estimation am I saying they're not going to address it, because I think they're going to address it. I'm just surprised, a little bit surprised, not a lot, but a little bit surprised that the Eagles kind of went as close as they ever have, at least since I've been here, to keeping the 53 best guys that they thought without, you know, without sort of thinking about typical roster building.
Well, I'll buy the typical roster building, but typical roster building for me also includes having someone who can cover a kick or a punt. And they're putting that aside. It's nice to be able to say, we kept the 53 best football players, but you got to put a comma in there from the line of scrimmage. Then you add special teams, and I don't know if they kept the 53 best
well, that's
players.
fair. That's fair, but nobody cares. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody cares. Nobody cares until they care. Look, and even the Super Bowl, you would think, and I always laud this organization, always, for generally making sound decisions. You've heard me say that numerous times.
Sure.
They did not learn their lesson from the Super Bowl. I think for whatever reason, people were clouded by the tampering afterwards. And they forgot the biggest play of the game. Now, hey, granted, the defense didn't play well. The biggest play of the game was the punt return. That's the play that tilted the game to Kansas City. That's the game that tilted the game toward Kansas City. And it was certainly part punter, but it was also part coverage. And they had the number 3 offense in the NFL, Jody. They had the number 2 defense in the NFL. They had a bottom 5 special teams group. Bottom 5, if you want to look at PFF, if you want to look at Rick Gosselin's annual rankings, bottom 5 in both.
That's why I was borderline shocked when they gave Michael Clay a contract extension. But after what they did today, I'm going to give Michael Clay a lot of rope, because it looks to me like they did not care about the talent and or the accomplishment of guys on this roster who have special teams experience. It really is
And you know
almost.
what's funny about it, Jody? Dating back to Andy Reid, this team was famous. It was John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh was the best special teams coach of a generation who became an NFL head coach because of his special teams work. Now, at the very end, Andy shifted him to whatever it was, secondary,
DBs,
to get him out because those guys are pigeonholed. They're not thought of as head coaching candidates. And they were always famous. And then Chip came in with Dave Phipp, and whether it was Ike Reese, your buddy from WIP, whether it was, Chris Maragos is one of the best special teams players I've ever seen. Brian Brayman, on and on and on. They were always famous for these guys that their resume led with special teams. They don't do that anymore.
And we'll see if they pay a price for it. All right. Our first guest is going to join us in just a couple minutes. We've never had Olivia on before. And I'm going to call her Olivia R, much like Albert O, because we're not 100% sure on the pronunciation of her last name.
I just call her Olivia. So,
Okay, we'll call her Olivia, but we'll also ask her how we get her last name correct. Two things I learned yesterday. And for future reference, maybe Eagle fans should want to try and remember this as well. Number one, the Eagles don't care about preseason games. There's some nuance to that. They kept Ricks because of the preseason game and games they played. So maybe they put more emphasis on it than we like to believe. And number two, you can't always take the coach's plaudits and try and read between the lines. Because if that were the case, Trey Sermon would be on this football team. And as expected, he was told, yeah, we don't quite have a roster spot for you.
By the way, real quick, Jody, Albert O, too. They talked about his 100-yard
100-yard game. How we went right to the last preseason game stats.
What are you talking about?
In the last preseason game.
I'm like, who am I speaking to, and who took Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni? All of a sudden, preseason action means something.
That's what I came away from yesterday.
Yeah.
So put that one in your back pocket for next year when we get there. Don't just dismiss all the preseason games.
Yeah. I was looking
23 guys in civilian clothes. For
Jody, I was looking for the aliens who, the invasion of the body snatchers. What the hell are these guys talking about?
I knew it was Howie and Nick because they were trying to be funny.
Oh, yeah.
Apologizing to Jordan Mailata because he won't be returning punts this upcoming season. It was Nick and it was Howie out there, but they may have changed.
Howie's always workshopping material and it never lands, but God bless him. He keeps trying.
All right. He's McMullen. I'm McDonald. That makes us Mac and Mac on Birds 365. Olivia R. Yeah, we're going to get that exact pronunciation, which he joins us next from the Inquirer here on Birds 365.